For this episode, I've been talking to Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis of Moneyball fame, of The Big Short fame. In other words, someone who's got to grips with American financial life and its various crises, but also much more widely, actually. He's written about other aspects of American life, and he's just written a new book about the civil service, which sounds a bit dry, doesn't it? But it's anything but that, because it's about the lives of individual people who he thinks make a difference inside American government. And his point is that America's disdain for government is not based on something real. It's based on a kind of sense of the civil service that isn't the right sense, that doesn't understand the job being done by a load of people who are working very hard for very little money. And he has a wider point as well to make about the Democrats and how they combat the Republican view, and certainly Donald Trump's view of the civil service, that actually you could get rid of a lot of it and it wouldn't make any difference. So here is my interview with Michael Lewis.
Americast from BBC News.
So first thing to say, Michael Lewis, thank you for coming on Americast. Good to see you in the flesh.
Yes, I know. We were always doing it down the line. It's so good to see you in person.
You come to London quite a lot there, do you?
Couple times a year in the last 5 or 10 years, but I'm about to come more often. I'm about to be a more frequent visitor.
And you were educated at the Great London School of Economics, where, of course, a lot of American politicians, at least used to be LSE people, maybe fewer of them now.
Yeah, for me, I came over after I graduated from university because it was the one place that would take someone who had not studied economics and put them through, no, I know it's odd, and put them through the whole undergraduate education in a year and then allow them to get the master's the next year. And plus there was a girl I chased over here. She was going there. That's actually why I looked at it in the first place.
Okay. Tell us about the book, because one of the things I think we all kind of implicitly believe, and this is pre-DOGE, pre-Elon Musk, we kind of believe that one of the kind of core principles of the United States, almost going back to Reagan, is that you don't like being governed and you don't like government. And that is true, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly true that it's easier to hate on government than it is to sell it. And that at least since Reagan, nobody has really sold it in a full-throated way. The Republicans dump on it and say it's inefficient and so on and so forth. And the Democrats have never really defended it. But still, it's there. And it's not, the myth is that it's kind of growing and out of control. The civilian workforce, public sector workforce is about 2 million people now, which is the same number of people who were in it in the late 60s. So it's sort of shrunk in relation to the rest of the population. The reason I got interested in it just as material, it wasn't like politically motivated. I wasn't trying to sell a story. It was, I started wandering around the government when Trump took it over the first time because he wasn't paying any attention to it. And I thought, well, somebody needs to. And I could not believe the caliber of the person I kept meeting. And they were, what it felt like was this is a pretty precious collection of experts dealing with a massive range of arcane problems that the private sector doesn't want to address. And, everything from disease control to managing the nuclear arsenal to toxic waste cleanups to, you name the agency, and the problems it's dealing with are profound. And the people who are there because they want to deal with the problems. Now, of course, it's got its problems. I mean, one of the big problems with the federal workforce is very hard to fire people, very hard to hire people. So each agency would have its kind of broken toy department where they put the people who weren't very useful, but they were trivial. They were not a great experience. The bigger thing was surprisingly interesting problems, surprisingly dedicated people with great stories that weren't being told.
Tell us a couple of those stories. Tell us about the people. Because they are essays, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're reportage. And there's 6 other writers doing it with me this time. I'll tell you the first one. The first one that is by me. A fellow in the Department of Labor, already put you to sleep, Department of Labor, named Christopher Marks. And Christopher Marks has over the last 30 years, solved the problem of coal mine roofs falling in on the heads of coal miners. It was a problem he got to in a really odd way, but But the problem itself sounds, oh, that's narrow. It's actually not that narrow. 50,000 American workers in the last century have been killed by roofs falling in on their heads. I mean, coal mining is the most dangerous occupation in America, and that's how people die half the time when they're killed. And he fixed this problem. What's wild about him is how he decided to attack this problem. When you're with people like him, you come to appreciate all they care about is the problem. They don't care that you're right. They don't care for attention. He doesn't care for money. Smart as a whip, could have made 5 times as much money doing something in the private sector, but found himself at the age of 19, long ago, in a coal mine, saw people being killed, himself was almost killed, and decided to address the problem, and found pretty quickly that the only place this was possible was the government, that the private sector had no interest in dealing with it. Essentially, people are doing what they're doing for reasons other than fame and fortune. You feel when you're with these people, sort of almost the opposite of the stereotype of the lazy bureaucrat. You feel like you're with someone who is passionately engaged with something that is extremely important, and they're doing it not for themselves, but for others. And that they've just sort of discovered the key to a meaningful life, like living for some reason other than yourself. And they're patriotic. There's a selfless streak. They're kind of they're different from the culture right now. Yeah. And so that's what attracted me to the subject in the first place. It's like, for me, generally, when there is some popular conception that seems radically off once you see the actual situation, and this was it. It was like, you ask the average American what people are doing inside the Department of Labor, they'd have nothing good to say. They'd say, people are showing up and punching the clock 9 to 5, living off federal payroll, et cetera, et cetera. The reality was, deeply committed person who had turned his back on lots of money to do things for his fellow Americans and didn't care if he was rewarded for it. That gap, perception and reality, was so vast that it just cried out for writers to come in and close it.
Do you think Elon Musk has done them a favor, in the sense that he came, he saw, and he went away, and actually wielding that chainsaw, pointing out to Americans that when some people were sacked, it wasn't a terribly good idea and they had to rehire them, all the other things that happened on his watch? Do you think it helped?
So what he did do that was maybe in the long run good for them, but we will see, is he drew attention to them. And he did not the attention. It didn't have the effect he thought it was going to have. He had no idea what he's getting into. It was really clear that he said he was going to cut $2 trillion out of the federal deficit, and he didn't cut anything out of the federal deficit, really. He may have added to it in a funny way, but he didn't make any meaningful reform. There is need for reform, but it's sort of systemic. It isn't like willy-nilly cut people. He cut exactly the wrong people. Like, he didn't find the broken toy department. What he did was he cut who he could cut, and people who've been in the civil service for 18 months or longer have these protections. So he cut these people who'd been there for only 18 months or less. And who is that? Young people who've just come in, and experts who've been hired for some problem that's of the moment. And it's exactly who you don't want to cut. And no one was subjected to competency tests or performance reviews or nothing. So he did a lot of damage to the institution, but inadvertently, you might not be wrong. It may be true. So he came in, had the best shot of sort of destroying the thing, upset a lot of people in doing it. There was a little bit of a backlash. Maybe he's created an opportunity for someone to come in a more thoughtful and loving way, sort of make this place work better. But I don't know. I don't have a strong view about that. I think mainly what he did was awful. So one of the tells of DOGE was that when they said that, for example, millions of Americans or hundreds of thousands of Americans who were dead were getting Social Security benefits, and that turned out to be actually not true. Approximately 0 were. They had to say stuff like that because they couldn't find real abuse. They couldn't. So the corruption, The idea that there's a whole lot of corruption inside the federal government is insane. It's the most watched workforce in the world. And even when I'm reporting in it, if I try to buy lunch, like a sandwich for one of these people, they won't let me do it. You can't give them $20. So that's not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is it is wasteful. It's wasteful because it's mismanaged out of Congress. It's like it's dated technology. It's an incentive system that's weird. It's like you can't promote people except because they do a good job. You have to promote them because they've been there a long time, that kind of thing. There are problems with it, but he didn't address any of the problems.
That then gets to the Ezra Klein point. So we quite often mention Ezra Klein, the New York Times journalist, very influential guy on the left, obviously in America. You know that. A lot of Americasters know that. And one of his shticks is that the Democrats have got too close to the administrative state. They defend it almost willy-nilly all the time. And he gives two very big examples. He's written about the high-speed rail in California.
Which is a state issue.
That's a state issue, but it's never had. It's still a government issue. It's a state. It's a local state. Right. Yeah, sure. And the other thing, which is a federal government issue, is rural broadband.
Yeah.
Which Joe Biden tried to introduce, and it just never really happened because there were all sorts of provisos put on the kind of companies that had to apply and what their hiring practices would have to be, et cetera, et cetera. And Ezra Klein's point is that if the Democrats get too close to that system and seem to be defending it in what he calls an almost fetishistic way, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's true. But you don't actually see Democratic politicians standing up and offering full-throated defenses of the federal workforce. You may see them overreach with like spending bills, with proposals that require the government to do a lot without ever thinking much about how it gets implemented. And what happens then is that the task gets foisted upon these government workers, and they are not given the tools to do it. This story is really about the people who are working in government. They are not the politicians. And it's really hard to find the Ezra Klein dysfunction inside that workforce. You can find them, being told to do something and not giving me tools to do it, so it doesn't turn out well. State government's a little bit of a different thing. It's also really hard to find like presidents standing up and like celebrating their workforce. Just the opposite. We wrote this book, the Who is Government book. It was reported and written out during the Biden administration. And all 7 writers, it was me and 6 others, had a hell of a time getting inside the bureaucracy because the Biden administration wouldn't let us get in. I mean, that their communications people were very wary of having any story told about the federal workforce. They are nervous about explaining the government. So I'm not sure Ezra and I, we would disagree on this. It's true. Like you ask government to do something the government's not going to do well and it won't do it well. But there are things that only the government will do. And so we better figure out how to structure the government so it can do them.
Figure out how to structure the government, but also when you think of the future of the Democrats, figure out how to structure the party so that it appeals to people and tells the kind of stories to them, I suppose, that you tell in your book. In other words, that there's got to be a kind of new appeal, hasn't there? Just thinking much more widely now about American politics and about the state of it, and people regularly ask us, what's going on with the Democrats? Is Trump popular? The answer is no, not
So it's
not
an odd
terribly.
situation, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's popular.
But exactly,
Right.
which is fascinating.
Yeah. That people seem to like their congressman but hate Congress.
Including the Democrats. Whereas you'd expect to bounce back, wouldn't you?
You would expect to bounce back. It is true that no politician has really woven a compelling national narrative outside, except for Trump. And his is an ugly narrative, and it actually isn't that compelling to most of the country. I mean, he's not popular. So to back away, our book did not did not set out to solve all of America's problems. It really was. It had a really simple ambition, and it was just to exploit the lazy stereotype of the government worker.
But it does tell a story that's an unfashionable story to tell, and a story that the Democrats, it seems to me as an onlooker, that the Democrats have difficulty telling the kind of stories that you tell with such ease in the book. There's something kind of holding them back.
One of the things that hamstrings the Democratic politicians from explaining how government could work is that they're raising money from the same people as the Republicans. I wrote a book called Flash Boys now 10 years ago, and it was about how the American stock market had basically been broken and remade in such a way where there were just unnecessary rents being paid to high frequency traders, people pulling out unnecessarily billions of dollars as middlemen who didn't need to be there. I have had 3 SEC chairmen tell me since, who were in the job, that when they took the job, that was like something they wanted to fix. It was that it was crazy the way the stock market was structured, that you had the richest people in America having essentially preferential access to information about about the market prices that enabled them to trade with an edge. And the minute they tried to do something about it, with the regulators tried to do something about it, the richest people in America threw their money into the political process and just stymied them. Like, you couldn't fix that problem because of money. So I think one of the things that's going on with Democrats is they got this voice in their head when they're talking about government. Oh, we don't want to offend our rich donors. And it's amazing how quickly you can get there. You can start uttering words that are offensive.
It's exactly what Bernie Sanders says.
He's right. It's probably Steve Bannon would say too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Steve Bannon, the Trump advisor, is very much on the right,
yes,
but actually they meet on this.
The second thing is that it's funny how much easier it is to tell bad stories than good stories. I mean, the reason I had to get really talented writers, like novelist type writers, to tell these stories is that they were not conventional journalistic explorations of like a problem, that some horrible thing that went wrong in the government. Essentially, there are lots of bright spots in the government. It's very hard to tell the bright spot stories in a compelling way. I mean, these are compelling because we have these characters, and the things they're doing for deep psychological reasons, but the bright spots just get ignored. The problems are the things that get attention, and I think it is just generally hard for any storyteller, much less a politician, to sort of elevate the bright spots and make sense of them. So it's just a harder narrative challenge.
But is it possible then for the Bernie Sanders, I mean, you think of this tour that Bernie Sanders has just done with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the very up-and-coming progressive left Democrat, may well be a candidate in 28. Is that the future, do you think, for the party, that they find someone who can tell a compelling economic populist kind of message and is free to do so because they free themselves from all the hindrances of
it's the one that resonates.
Right, yeah.
I'd bet on that. Yes, I would bet on that. Some storyteller, some leader who is tapping into what Bernie Sanders tapped into. Yes.
Because what Sanders manages to do, which is fascinating, is get beyond all the kind of trans rights and all the things that have hampered the party because they're just not culturally popular, whether or not they should be. They're just not. I mean, factually, they're not. And kind of move into a space where they could be popular, it seems to me. And that certainly seems to be his intention, and possibly others on the left of the party now, that they use a new kind of appeal to people. So it's not identity anymore. I suppose that's...
No. It's fairness.
Yeah.
It's fairness. And it is, if you look at what animates Trump supporters and what animates Sanders supporters, it's not that different. It's anger about unfairness. It's just how they're tapping into it differently. And I mean, he's driven entirely by anger. That's the emotion that fuels his movement. And he's unbelievably good at ginning up grievances or people to be angry at, and giving his followers the catharsis of inflicting cruelty upon whoever he's angry at. It's so I think at the bottom of American politics is unfairness. It's inequality and unfairness. It feels the society does feel rigged in many ways. And so if you're not speaking to that, you're not going to connect with the audience. And the only people who are connecting with the audience, with the electorate, are people who are speaking to that. The missing piece here, and where this book would come in, if it came in at all, is that the tool for addressing unfairness is the government. It's the mechanism. And explaining how that's going to happen is sort of like that would be the sort of challenge of anybody who is going to lead the Democrats. It would, and it's, if you look at the stories in the book, all of them one way or another are people in very specific roles in the government addressing an unfair situation and making life a little better for people who are like on the wrong side of unfairness. And I think, it's broadly other things happening in the culture is that once you introduce the kind of radical unfairness that we have, people on both sides of the unfairness behave very badly. Rich people, people who are privileged, behave badly. They assume the privilege is a birthright. That they like it and want to keep it, and people on the wrong end of it are outraged. So there's this. I think Trump is operating right there in the anger created by the unfairness. And what is odd is that, he's a billionaire. He's using the office to enrich himself. He's not an obvious spokesman for the people who feel gypped. There are more obvious people who could stand up and speak to that crowd. And I keep waiting for it to happen. But I think the problem is the Democrats have been, had their hands in the pockets of the rich, and they've gotten used to it. And that it's going to take a politician who's comfortable operating without his hand in those pockets.
Fascinating few years to come in American politics. Michael Lewis, as ever, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode. You can listen to any of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from me, bye-bye.